Hello, and welcome to Conversations with Matt. In the last episode, we began to look at Jesus' world and compare it to ours. We saw that the modern Western world focuses more on economic success, whereas the people Jesus interacted with, as well as most people throughout history, lived by honor and shame. In this episode, we're going to look at two of the most basic questions. What are honor and shame? And where does honor come from? To begin with, honor is a claim to worth that is socially acknowledged. Honor is a claim to worth that is socially acknowledged. Let me give an example to explain what I mean by that. Let's suppose you and a coworker were supposed to do a project together. You do your work, but the other person doesn't do theirs. Then your teammate acts like they did everything and starts telling everyone that you didn't hold up your end. They take credit for your work. I know this is totally hypothetical. No one we know would ever do something like that. The worst part is, though, that everybody seems to believe them. So now what? Well, we might try to shrug it off and tell ourselves that we actually did the work. And that's what's important. We know what really happened. We tell ourselves that what we did was actually right and that it's not as important what other people think. To someone who lives in an honor and shame culture, however, it is more important what other people think. Remember the parable of the two sons from the last episode? The son that people thought did the right thing was the one who publicly said he would do what his father wanted and then didn't do it. How you are viewed by other people is more important than what you actually do. Remember, honor is a claim to worth that is recognized by other people. So if people think you're lazy and you didn't do your work, then to some extent, it doesn't matter whether you actually did your work or not. As long as people think you don't do your work, they don't trust you. Now you might notice that this doesn't sound completely foreign to our world. Continuing our example, if your boss believes the other person, they might get promoted over you. So having others recognize your claim to worth can have real consequences. The truth is that no culture is entirely honor and shame based, so that what you do doesn't matter, and no culture is so focused on what you actually do that it doesn't matter what other people think of you. Really, we're talking about a spectrum. So as we go over the characteristics of honor and shame cultures, you will probably find some similarities in our Western culture. This is to be expected because we're not completely on one side of the spectrum. We're just not as far towards the honor and shame side as the people in Jesus' world. So a good way to summarize this might be that in the Western world, appearance is important. In an honor and shame culture, appearance is everything, or at least most. This has the effect that in an honor and shame culture, when we're talking about morality, it is not as important what you do as it is what people think about what you do. And this raises the question, if you do something wrong, but if people don't know about it or think badly about you for doing it, is it still wrong? That's a whole other topic, but if we're more concerned about what people think than about what we actually do, that's the kind of question that we need to ask. The old question is, if a tree falls in the woods and no one hears it, does it make a sound? Well, we might ask, if a man does something wrong and no one ever finds out about it, is it really wrong? In this case, because a person's claim to worth has to be acknowledged by other people, then what they think is really important, and to some degree, it makes a difference to that question. So at this point, I think you're probably starting to see that honor is really important, right? Let's see if we can make it make sense in our culture. In our world, it helps to have people trust you if you want to get their help with something, right? Well, suppose you were able to take how much people trusted you, liked you, respected you, and put all of that into a single number, sort of a social rating. Then you added that number to your credit rating, the numbers you use to be able to borrow money for a house or a car. For us, these are two separate things. Both are good, but they're different. However, for people in Jesus' day, these were the same thing. Everything you did depended on your honor rating, your social credit rating, if you will. And while it's not really possible to put a number on it, having a good honor rating is really important. You could not say, for example, I have an honor rating of 63, but people would spend a lot of time talking about how much honor individuals had and then compare who had more. So there was, in effect, a ranking system. So what is shame? Westerners think it's the opposite of honor. This isn't true. Shame is sensitivity about one's reputation. Shame is considering one's honor level to be important. I should point out there is a difference between having shame and being shamed. Having shame is sensitivity about your reputation. Being shamed is being knocked down a notch. So you want to have shame, but you don't want to be shamed. Now, we're pretty familiar with the idea of being shamed, but having shame is a little less familiar. We still use this expression, though. Think of someone who acts with complete disregard for others and how they think of him or her. You can picture a parent saying something to them like, "Have you no shame?" This is what it means to have shame. It's concern for the opinion of others, and it is still valued in our culture to a degree, though not by everyone. So, honor is a claim to worth that is socially acknowledged. Having shame is concerned about your honor level, and being shamed is being knocked down a notch in the honor ranking system. So we've covered what honor and shame are. Now we need to ask the final question. Where does honor come from? Remember, honor is social status. Like wealth, it can be inherited or earned. So let's start with inherited status. Where do you begin? Well, status comes through your ancestors. Think about both Old and New Testament. If you've ever read through certain of the books, you found that there are some really long genealogies that are super boring. Well, to people who live in an honor and shame culture, it's not, because this gives your background. It explains who your family is. It explains where you came from. And for people who have a high reputation, it's also an indicator of inherited honor. Remember, we talked about last time, family is part of your LinkedIn profile, and it is the most important part. Now, maintaining your honor level comes by fulfilling your prescribed role in society. Everyone has a very set role from the time that they're born, based on your gender, your role in your family, who your family is, your profession, and so forth. You have a set role that you are expected to perform for your entire life. And there are very specific patterns of behavior for each. Now, respecting appropriate persons was also important. This was part of how you maintained your honor level. You needed to understand your place in the hierarchy. And you had a higher place if you were older rather than younger, if you were male rather than female, if you were powerful rather than weak, and so forth. However, even the most senior and powerful male was still a human, and that person had to respect the god or gods, depending on which religion you were in. This wasn't just a Jewish thing. It wasn't just a Christian thing. This was an everybody thing. The whole world operated like this. And as we said last time, it's only cultures that come out of Western Europe in the last few hundred years that are different. Now, at this point, I want to stop because we're about to get into a much bigger topic. We talked about honor as sort of a social ladder and said that where you start on that ladder is based on who your family is, your gender, your role in society, and so forth. And we said that if you fill your role acceptably, you maintain your spot on the ladder. Now, in the next episode, I want to look at how a person gains or loses honor through challenge and response. This is a much larger topic, and we'll spend an entire episode on this. We're going to talk about how a person moves up or down the ladder. And we're also going to look at several scriptural examples and see how this works out in practice. And it might change how you look at some of the passages you thought you understood. So, be sure to subscribe to this podcast to keep up with the series. And remember, if you have a question, you can ask it on my Facebook page, facebook.com/Matt Delacre. Join me next time as we take a look at challenge and response.